Went to the fire station at, what time, 6:10? Checked in fire call and then came here. About 6:30 I got here, which is about normal, 6:15, 6:30. Usually I'm the first one here every day.
Hi there, I'm Sam Temple. When I began working for the city of Northfield in 2019, I was eager to get to know my coworkers and the people we serve. I decided to turn my own personal introduction into an introduction for the general public. I interviewed a variety of people in January, February, and March of 2020. Production was delayed indefinitely due to the pandemic, but once in a while I get to look back at those interviews and turn them into these episodes. Here, Northfield Public Broadcasting presents a sampling of Northfield's civil servants and the people that they serve. This series shares the stories of our neighbors in Northfield, but what to title such a series? Well, we took inspiration from the town founder, John North, who wrote of the Cannon River Valley, quote, "No portion of the country east or west can boast a more intelligent or enterprising people than the scattering inhabitants of this valley." One of our enterprising people is Sean Simonson, engineering manager, volunteer firefighter, and avid outdoorsman. I interviewed Sean 4 years ago. We discussed his work in Northfield, his family memories of the family farm, and how life's circumstances can shape you just as much as you shape them. Here is my conversation with Sean Simonson.
Moved here back in March of 2000, and I've been here ever since. I have 2 kids, so that keeps me pretty busy. They're 2 daughters, 10 and 8. They're in dance, softball, what else? Gymnastics, so we do a lot of running with that stuff. And as they get older, it just gets busier and busier. Yeah. And other hobbies I like to do, I like to hunt and fish and snowmobiling, which I'm hoping to do here soon. When I haven't done that this whole winter yet. Me and 2 of my friends own 80 acres of CREP land, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, down in Brown County where I grew up. So I like to spend a lot of time out there. We've owned it for about 11 or 12 years now. Do a lot of tree planting, do a lot of mowing paths and upkeep of deer stands, stuff like that. Whenever I get the chance, I like to go out there. Paid for it with our hard-earned money that you take pride in it. It's conservation. I take my daughters out there hunting, deer hunting, pheasant hunting, duck hunting, and it's rewarding to know that I put in a lot of the work and get to take advantage of the fruits of my labor with that. I like to hunt and fish, and it's getting harder and harder to find spots to do that at, unless you own it. And if I wanted a future in this type of activities for my kids, which I didn't have any, I wasn't even married at the time, I figured what a better way to do it than to have my own piece of the pie, and that's how it started. And some land came up back where I grew up, so it was close, and I was familiar with the previous landowners and the lay of the land, so I knew it really well. We call it the 80. It's just 80 acres, so its unofficial name is the 80. Like I said, it's in CRP, so it's a lot of the switchgrass type look. It's actually a wetland restoration, so there's about 3 different ponds on it that take about 20 acres of the 80. So it's nice and wet, and that brings in all kinds of different wildlife and different things. But you walk in there and you look around, and you're always keeping your eyes peeled, because usually I'm trying to sneak in to go deer hunting and sit in one of my deer stands. Or beautiful to sit out there at night when it gets quiet. The sun starts to hit the horizon, everything's orange. That switchgrass has got that glowing orange. The pheasants are always cackling, which is fun when you're pheasant hunting, but when you're deer hunting, you're always trying to sneak in, and the pheasants always make so much noise. So it kind of, when they get up and fly away, a lot of times you'll see a white tail running. You're like, oh, there's a deer that was laying out here. But yeah, it's just really peaceful. It's a getaway. When I just sit there, it's like you shut everything off and just take it in. And on the back of your mind, you're always like, oh, I hope a deer comes, or let's shoot some pheasants today, because that's the enjoyable part. But as I get older, I look at it where it's kind of a circle of life with hunting, and we do a lot of hunting that when I was younger, my dad was always like, oh, I hope the boys get a deer. And he was always going out there. He wanted us to shoot a deer. Now it's almost like reverse roles, where now I'm 40 years old and my dad's in his mid to late 60s. Like, boy, I wish Dad would shoot a deer, because he deserves to be excited like we do. And it's weird how that all changes as you get older. And it'll be the same for me now when my kids get older. My dad's side of the family are all farmers. We help out with the family farms. My mom passed away back in 2014, so he's living by himself. So I have a brother that lives in Mankato. He's the closest to him, and a sister in Shoreview. So we all grew up in the area, but we all moved out. And that's ultimately my goal, is to probably move back to that area and just enjoy, because the area has a lot more of my interests than what I have here. But at this time in my life, this is where I need to be. My wife, Laura, she was actually born in Austin, Minnesota. And then her mother and father moved here when I think she was around 2. So she's been in Northfield since like 1984. So that's how I met her. I actually met her through her stepdad. Her stepdad, Doug Leon, was water superintendent here at the city. He's since retired, I think back in 2015 or 16, something like that. I met her through him. He introduced me to her, and that's how we met back, oh gosh, it must have been 2001. So that's where I met her, and then we ended up getting married in 2008 is when we got married. But she's been pretty much Northfield lifetime her entire life. I was 3 years older than her, and she had just graduated high school. And when I started here, I was only 20. So I was right out of college, fresh out of college when I got hired here at the city. We were both young, but two different stages. You know, I'd already went through college and graduated. She was going through college, and then we dated for, oh gosh, 8 years almost before we got married. My dad grew up on a small farm right outside of Sanborn, Minnesota, Circle S Ranch, we call it. He grew up there. He was born in 52. I believe my grandpa bought that ranch back in 48. The main farm itself is probably about 300 acres of tillable pasture land. And then the Cottonwood River, we call it the Mighty Cottonwood. It's probably like 30 feet across, runs through that. So it's very diverse land. And my grandpa bought that farm in 48. He worked very hard. He's probably one of the hardest working men that I know. He raised 4 kids on that farm. My dad was the second oldest. My Uncle Bob is the oldest. And then my Aunt Valerie and my Aunt Paula, who we call Tilly, were all raised on that farm. My Aunt Paula and her husband Al own the farm now. And my first cousin Blaine lives on the home place, still runs all the land. And my aunt and uncle had bought the farm back in the early 90s. We lived on a farm as a kid. In about second grade, I think it was, we ended up moving off the farm and moving to town, which was a struggle for me. I love the farm. And then my dad worked in town many years, different jobs, fabrication shops, stuff like that. Just a blue-collar, hardworking guy. Always did what he needed to get done to have everybody survive. My mom, she was a housewife until I went to kindergarten finally. Then she went out and got a job. So I have an older brother and older sister. My brother and sister are 15 months apart. And my sister and myself are only 11 months apart. We moved off the farm and we ended up moving to Springfield, Minnesota, which is about 8 miles away, which is big rival of Sanborn. It's funny, but I still think my roots are in Sanborn. My mom went back to school then. It was very commendable for her to do that. That was a tough thing. You know, I was probably, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade when she finally got her nursing degree, something like that. She went through a lot, working night shifts and working days, going to night classes in town. Like I said, they're both very hardworking. I had to find a career that still piqued my interest, but had the values of what I was brought up. And as an engineering manager here for the city, I started out as an engineering technician where I was out with the construction projects and a lot of that, watching machinery, and that stuff really piqued my interest, and that's how I got into this. I still remember back to, it was probably late 80s, early 90s. Broward County made a new road right by our house, County Road 5. They put a new bridge in, built a whole new road across the river bridge, and brought it out to Highway 14. And I remember hours on end sitting there on the railroad tracks watching that road construction. And that's what really piqued my interest in watching those guys excavate and run equipment. I remember it was Mathwitz Construction out of Leavenworth that did the work. And I remember watching that for hours on end that summer. And I just really didn't know what part of it until I got a little older. And then I found out, you know, this engineering technician work that college in Mankato offered. That's what I started to go into. On our home place, we had hogs, so we always had fun doing pig chores. You know, at the end, my dad was working in town too, so me and my brother would get home from school, and my sister and my brother and I would go down and we'd scrape the manure in the barn because we didn't have a skid loader to scoop it out. You had to scoop it out by hand. So we'd go down there and scoop it, push it into the corner with shovels. So then when Dad would get home after a hard day of work at the fab shop he was working at, he had to come home and do chores too. We'd fill the water tanks for him and stuff like that, and we'd push all the manure in the corner, and then he'd be down there for an hour scooping it out the window, out into the pile where we'd pick it up and spread it at a later date. On my dad's home farm, my grandpa and grandma's farm, I mean, it was like a routine every Sunday. We went out there Sunday afternoons. That's where you went. Everybody congregated at the farm, and Grandma always cooked suppers, and it was great. And we could explore. We had hundreds of acres to old gravel pits and ponds where we catch frogs. And I mean, we'd go BB gun hunting with whatever. I mean, we'd just shoot cans and whatever we could. I mean, it was so fun because we were always out there. And it's like one of the places in the world you could drop me off blindfolded and I could find my way back home. in the dark. I just know every inch of that place because we explored it all as kids. When we were in Sanborn, we always went to St. Thomas Catholic Church. My grandparents' house was right out of town, not even a quarter mile, just across the highway. And that's kind of where Sundays you'd go home, you'd change clothes and go right out to the grandparents. And yep, that was a big foundation for my family as a kid. The first year I went deer hunting with my father, we got off of the, I'm going to use some lingo that probably only my inner family is going to know, but they drop us off at the field approach on Highway 71, right down by the lagoon. My grandpa had sold like 30 acres to the city of Sanborn, and that's where they had their sewage treatment ponds. Me and my dad got off at the lagoon, and I went to Grandpa's Ravine, we called it, which anyone, again, my whole family's going to know that. And I walked across, it was dark, and my dad just go sit in Grandpa's Ravine, and when they're done walking the river, we'll come back. When my dad went and sat down by the bridge on 71, and I ended up shooting a deer that first morning I was out. It was pretty exciting. I remember that I walked along with him before I had a gun, but probably didn't pay much attention. I probably spent more time talking than him trying to tell me to be quiet than anything. But the first deer hunt, I do remember it very fondly. It started, back in the, I think my great uncle Gil and my great uncle Bud and my grandpa started deer hunting back in, I want to say sometime around the mid to late 50s or early 60s. And that tradition is carried on. There's about 8 or 9 of us that still carry on that tradition. And it's actually one of my favorite times of the year because it's kind of the only time some of them parts of the family get together. I was born July 23rd, 1979, which is, and we joke about this because we're from a small town, the greatest town celebration. Now, I know I'm in Northfield and I shouldn't knock the defeat of Jesse James Days, but we always call Watermelon Days the greatest town celebration in Sanborn, Minnesota. I was born over Watermelon Days. So my mom was in the hospital. My dad was over at Watermelon Days, and then I believe they went to the hospital, and I was born, and it was really hot. My dad said it was just hotter than hot. After I was born, my dad took my brother and sister up to see me. Of course, my sister was only 11 months old, and my brother would have been 26 months old, 27. He dropped them off at my grandparents in Springfield, and then he went over to Watermelon Days and celebrated the birth of his second son. But I know it was really hot and it was Watermelon Days. It's always during the week. It's usually on a Monday and a Tuesday. I think now it's right around that first week of August is when they have it. And I haven't been to it for probably, I suppose 7-8 years. The big tradition is they go through the parade. There's a pickup with watermelon in the back of it. And I don't know how it ever started, but at the end of the parade, the firemen and some other volunteers from the community go and slice watermelon up, and you go get a piece of watermelon when it's done. And then you have the watermelon, and they have a midway. And when I was a kid, it was always a fun deal because they always had the Mighty Might baseball tournament was a big deal. And we always could never beat Redwood, but that's just the way it goes. The social circle I had back then, and I still have the same friends. We all go on trips together. We generally go somewhere in the summer and rent a cabin. Again, I was the only kid really that lived in town. The rest of them were all farm kids. So there was a group of about 5 to 6 gentlemen that I hung out with all the way through. Some of them were about 2 years younger than me, up to my age. And now our kids are getting to be the same age. And like I said, they all still live there. I went to South Central College. It was actually at that time, it was South Central Technical College. One of my mom's friends, her son, Brian, who actually worked here when I started, I used to tag along with him and his brother, Sean. I used to just tag along with those guys to go hunting because they always were good hunters. They always had places to go. I remember in 9th grade in my civics class with Mr. Bertram, we had to do a career. We had to figure out what a career to pick and do a report on it. And I ended up picking civil technology. I ended up interviewing Brian. He gave me all the information that I needed on it. And then ever since that day, that's kind of where I just gravitated towards that because Brian kind of had the same interests as myself. I went to college in Mankato, South Central College, 2-year degree. It took me 2.5 because I had to work when I was in college because I had to pay for everything. So I ended up working back home. I actually worked at the co-op. I worked there for all the way through college. I drove back and forth quite a bit, worked during the fall a lot. I started here when I was 20, so I didn't have a terrible amount of experience at other jobs other than just the labor portion of it. And I think I developed quite a bit of work ethic because working in the agricultural, you got 4 weeks in the spring and 4 weeks in the fall to get pretty much all the work done. Working at the co-op before I came here, I worked a lot of long hours. And then when I got here as an engineering technician, I was working a lot of long hours too because we have pretty compact construction season as well. So when I finished college, I got my degree, and I was working at Harvest Land Co-op in Springfield, and I was living at home with my parents. And I mean, I had everything I ever needed right there. All my friends were around. I was having a good time. I enjoyed it. And my dad actually, he said, you went to school, you're smart, you need to go do, you're above what you're doing right now. You need to just go apply what you learned. And I actually applied for 2 jobs, one in Brown County, the county I lived in New Ulm, and then the job here in Northfield. And I interviewed both, and I was offered both positions. It ultimately came down to my dad just saying, I think you should just get out of here and go experience something else. I had absolutely no ties to Northfield, except, my friend Brian did work here. To me, it was a big risk. When I left, I was pretty comfortable where I was. I could have just stayed and worked for Brown County, and I would have probably been just as happy too. Looking back on it, I wouldn't change anything. I am where I am, and there's a lot of things that I have here now that I would have never had if I would have took a different path. My desk was a big drafting table. They didn't even have a desk for me. I sat in the office for a couple hours, read some specifications, and then there was a job that was going on already, a new development construction. I went out and started working out in the field right away. Working for a county and a city is really different. With the city, you do 1 mile of construction through the heart of town. You got 50 households that you get to communicate with. In the county, you maybe have 1 or 2. There's a lot of communication that you need to do to keep residents informed on what's going on, because basically when you're a project inspector, you're the pipeline to the information. And I always tell my wife this, I get to meet 50 households a year every time we do a project, because you're selling a product. And I mean, I'm not trying to say I'm a salesman, but when we're doing a road project in front of someone's houses, we want to improve the street, and basically we're selling a product without being a salesman. That's what we try. And again, communications is so vital in that. You don't expect people, and that's the part you have to understand, is construction, road construction, anything like that, it's really unique. I mean, it's a specialized area that just anybody off the street doesn't know what happens. And that's what a person in my background now, being here almost 20 years, is I'm the wealth of knowledge to let these people know why we're doing this and make them feel comfortable why we're doing it. Most people come by and say, well, you dug the street up 3 times. Why? Well, because we got to put the sanitary main in first, then we got to put the water main in, and then we have to put the storm sewer in. And we're compact streets that aren't very wide, and we don't have much room to do all that work. So that's why we're doing it 3 times. But to someone just on the outside looking at it, it maybe looks like we don't know what we're doing. Well, yeah, you guys just dug there yesterday. But again, that's where getting the information out and just being a wealth of knowledge to the residents that's key to the success in these projects and all the other road construction that we do throughout town. I lived in an apartment for 5 years on the south end of town. I moved one time, and one of my high school friends moved in with me. He was working up in Lakeville. And then I bought my first house in the Riverside neighborhood down by the old Patricus County Market. So that was where I bought my first house. I bought that house for me and a dog. It was a starter home back in 2005. And then it ended up being me, a dog, a wife, and 2 kids. So we were busting at the seams, but I had bought in a bad time like everybody else. So we moved in 2017. I bought a new house. When I was hired back in March 27th of 2000, I was an engineering tech 1. Again, most of my work there was just doing construction inspection on projects. I started getting into design in the winter. We got into design. We used to do a lot of more design in-house. I think about year 5, I was promoted to an engineering tech 2. I did a little bit more of the reconstruction type work, not the new development stuff like I had done previous. And at about year 10 or 11 or 12, somewhere around there, I can't exactly remember, I was promoted again to engineering tech coordinator. So then I was more of a project management type position. In 2017, I believe it was, I was promoted to engineering manager. And that's my current position now. When I first started, budgets wasn't as big a deal. I mean, we always seemed to be doing all right. 2008 and somewhere around there, budgets were talked about a lot more. We used to have a lot more people, but we've became more efficient, and more people have taken on more duties. You look at a town of our size, and I think we have 6 or 7. We used to have 6 or 7 street operators. And again, that was streets and parks. I look at comparable towns like Fairbolt, they have probably double that. We had to become efficient in our operation to get everything done. Some of the stuff didn't get done as quick, but you still had to get it done. We got engaged at Clitheroe Lake, which is up by Battle Lake, Minnesota. We go to a resort up there. We've been going, my family, since I think 1983. I still go every summer, even though we have our place on Cedar Lake by Fairboat. We still take the week and we go up to Clitheroe Lake. The first day we got up there back in 2008, I think it was, I just proposed to her the day we got there. My firstborn, Marin, I remember that day pretty well because I was playing church league softball for St. Peter's. And we had a doubleheader that day, but we had time in between games. So went to the game and we went home. My wife was laying on the hammock outside and I was sitting in a lawn chair just hanging out and waiting for the next game. All of a sudden she's like, I think my water broke. She called the hospital, and of course we went up there. And that was probably about 5 o'clock in the evening. Marin was not born until I think 5:27 the next morning. So, and then my second daughter, Madison, she was induced. So that was not quite as hectic as the first one. Every daddy needs a daughter, as my dad would say. So, and my dad always kind of joked about this because, you know, us 3 kids were so close to each other that he says, you know, you really don't have to worry about your marriage until you kids leave. Because then it's just you and mom. And then you really got to work on it again, you know, because it seems like the kids are always there to kind of deflect this and do that because you're always running with them and going somewhere with them. And I understand what my dad means by that. He always joked about that and I didn't understand it. But now that I have my own kids, it's like, yeah, that is. Because all of a sudden someday he says, you're just going to wake up and the house is empty. And that's then, but you know what? He says that's when you do get to redevelop your relationship with your wife again. And after I graduated, moved out, they bought a camper. It's like, well, how come you didn't get a camper when we were kids? You know, well, now I know, you know, you can't afford stuff like that when you're raising kids, you know. They went to Florida on a trip and it's like, well, I never went to Florida. You never took us. But that's the kind of stuff after the kids left, they got to experience then because then they weren't so tied down in responsibility and financially to raising children. And that's something I'm looking forward to, definitely. My oldest, Marin, is a good student. She loves to read. She's very poised for her age. She was one of the defeated Jesse James Day's junior ambassadors back in 2018, I think it was. She's out in front of groups talking. You know, I mean, that program is outstanding for kids. And I encourage any parents that if they ever have the opportunity to put your kids through that, to definitely do that. Maddie, our youngest, she is a Spitfire. Again, that's from me. I was probably pretty challenging to raise as a kid. My parents always said that. So she's a little more in sports. She's a basketball player, so she likes doing that. They're 2 kids, but they're unique in their own way. And I wouldn't push one to do something they didn't want because the other one did it. I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, my brother received a bunch of scholarships at graduation. And I remember our principal at the time said something about, well, you got some big shoes to fill. And after thinking about it, I was like, I kind of want to pay my own way too, though. I've had this in the past where people on the road projects are just really against stuff. And again, I think it's just because lack of knowledge or that maybe they're just a little bit apprehensive of what we're going to do. But the best is at the end of the project when you're talking to these people. Like I said, I meet 50 new people a year, 50 new households. And whether it's at church on Sunday or Menards or the grocery store, I run into these people and they're always asking about stuff, whether, you know, and I you know, my kids and wife are God sense for this because, you know, I feel as my civic duty, I better stop and talk to them. You know, I don't want to blow them off. And hearing feedback, positive feedback from people that maybe were kind of negative at the beginning, once they understand what's going on, then I think it's more comfortable for them to, and again, that's probably the most satisfying is, wow, you guys really did a good job. And with me living in town, I don't get away from it. I'm planted here. My current family roots are here. And, you know, while I'm here, I'm going to make the best of it. Sometimes when you hear a lot of negative stuff, but you know what? I don't try to dwell on a lot of that stuff because you got to solve problems and you got to move on in city government because there's always another one that needs your attention. And I feel that it's my responsibility to give attention to all the issues that are out there. And if you really sit there and dwell on one, I think some of the other stuff becomes lacking. And I don't think that's providing a good service. And that's why we have a pretty robust public education process when we do our projects is we want these neighborhood meetings. We want people to come to that stuff because we want to hear the feedback from them. And that's the most important thing is being able to gather that data and take that data and build something that everybody can enjoy. And again, you're not going to be able to please every single person, but our goal is to try to improve for the whole. It's kind of like as a high school kid growing up, you don't really know what you value until you get older and look back and think, boy, that maybe I shouldn't have been so hard on my parents, stuff like that. I think it's the same as working here is I probably am not going to know that till I'm gone. Like I say, you don't know what you got till it's gone. I really don't know what I'm going to gain from Northfield yet until probably when I'm gone. And then I'm applying that type of skill somewhere else. And that's what I think as far as what I'm going to gain from Northfield, I just really don't know yet until you're gone. And then you look back and say, boy, that was very valuable to me. I can't imagine doing that your entire working career and not enjoying it. So you gotta gravitate to something you enjoy. And again, that's where as a kid growing up, I wanted to be a farmer. Seeing equipment run stuff really piqued my interest, and I knew I couldn't farm. So I feel I kind of got towards something that, that when I was a field inspector for the city, working out in construction sites and watching equipment run, I felt like this is great. I loved it. And now, as I've gotten through that portion of my life and in my career and where I'm at now I feel like I'm really just honing in and expanding my horizons with the different type of workload that I have now. And that's the kind of thing, like I said, is if you're going to do a job, you got to like it, because it's something you're going to do your whole life. There'd probably be nothing worse than retiring after 35, 40 years and looking back thinking, boy, I hated working there the whole time. And I just feel that that'd be a waste. And I don't feel that when I work here in Northfield.
Thank you, Sean, for your conversation, your service to the community, and for being one of the Cannon River Valley's enterprising people.